Hello, and welcome back to my channel, Talented Reads. Today I'm going to be talking about my January wrap-up for the Horror Challenge. Last month I did a video in which I discussed everything surrounding the Horror Challenge, so I will link that video in the description box below for you to check out if you want to watch that prior to watching this video. But a little reminder, this challenge is a mixture of books and videos in which I read 5 books and watch 4 movies. I will also recommend 4 books, 4 movies that I've previously read and watched. So let's get into January's picks. As I mentioned in that previous video, I am starting the challenge in the paranormal section because that's the subgenre that I felt I was more familiar with. When I reach for horror, whether that be books or movies, it tends to fit somewhere within this grouping. Or it's vampire, which is part of the monster section and coming a little bit later, which I'm equally very excited about. So January, I focused on ghosts and spirits. The 5 books I read for this category are The Silent Companions, The Little Strangers, Ghost Story, The Turn of the Screw, and Within These Walls. The Silent Companions by Laura Purcell was my 5-star read for the month and my favorite from all of the books that I read for this category. This book is set in the 1800s and follows the point of view of Elsie, who arrives at her late husband's estate called The Bridge. She arrives with her late husband's sister, and together they attempt to, run the household. But some things start happening. This is definitely a pure atmospheric book. As you're reading, you feel the unsettling and the eeriness. And the Silent Companions play a big role in the book, and that in itself is worth sticking in this category. The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters is a ghost horror story following Dr. Faraday, who is called to care for a patient at Hundreds Hall. Hundreds Hall is home to the Ayers family, and this house, used to be a place in society, but now it's kind of crumbling and not really to the full splendor that it once was. Dr. Faraday ends up getting close to the family, and they start experiencing some horrifying things in the house. This book ended up on the other end of the ghost spectrum. This is more of a slow burn, unsettling historical narrative. I think the ghost itself plays less of a main role, and I think that's because the book was the point of view of Dr. Faraday himself, who seemed to not be directly involved in what was happening, but more involved in the aftermath of what occurred. I will say this was my least favorite of the group of books that I read for this category. Ghost Story by Peter Straub follows the Chowder Society, in which 4 men gather to tell each other stories. But there's one story that is coming back to haunt them. This was a good mix of horror ghost story with something more monstrous. And I think while the premising was interesting, it felt a little long for what all happened in the book. Again, it had that small town atmosphere, but the ghost, I think, was more through the storytelling of their experiences rather than more of a character role. The Turn of the Screw by Henry James is about a governess who arrives to take care of two children, and things are not quite as they seem. So I'll admit I wasn't too impressed with The Turn of the Screw. However, I do respect it for being, a classic ghost horror story. And this was published so long ago. The language was a little challenging for me to get through. And some of the descriptions of the characters and the characters describing other characters were pretty outdated, so it was a little hard to get past that. And this actual story is pretty short, which honestly I was kind of thankful for. And lastly, I read Within These Walls by Anya Alborn, which follows crime writer Lucas. He is contacted by Jeffrey Holcomb, a notorious cult leader and death row inmate in prison for the murders of his cult followers. Jeffrey is ready to tell his story and wants Lucas to be the one to tell it. His only stipulation is Lucas must stay in the house that the cult lived in. So, as you can imagine, paranormal happenings are not far behind. So, when I think of ghost horror, honestly, this book is what I think of. That atmospheric, kind of mixed with this impending doom just looming in the background. And the narrative was split between the past and the present, and the two come, kind of smashing together, and the ending is just fantastic. This was my second favorite for the month. I will say, if you are not into cult books, you're probably not going to enjoy this one because it does have a pretty heavy cult narrative. So let's get into the movies that I watched. First, I watched Women in Black 2. I've seen Women in Black, which is actually an adaptation of the book with the same name, written by Susan Hill. A fantastic read. This is set in World War II times. A group of children arrive at the Eel Marsh house, which is played by the ghost of the Woman in Black. So I really enjoyed this, and I think I actually prefer this one over the first movie. I think you get more of the ghost in the storyline, and of course I think children in ghost movies always add to the creepiness because they bring this air of innocence to it, which is kind of fascinating. Lake Mundo is a fictional documentary style in which a family is interviewed after the drowning of their daughter, Alice. During the course of this film, the family starts to experience paranormal events in their home. So this was my favorite movie of the bunch. I love these documentary style films. I think it adds to the story and gives a sort of finality feel to it. And the mystery element of this, in which they kind of start to uncover things about, Alice herself, in addition to the paranormal element, I thought was a really good mix. So since I read The Turn of the Screw, I decided to watch an adaptation of it. So I chose to watch the most recent 2020 adaptation, which was The Turning. I think there were quite a few differences between this and the book. And, while I did enjoy this to a point, I actually didn't really care for the outcome. And the ghost part of this movie also wasn't my favorite. It was a little darker than I was expecting. And I thought it was a little unnecessary. But, I think there were a lot of creepy jump scares in this, which, I think when you're watching a horror movie, that's kind of what you look for. So for the last movie, I was really trying to watch The Devil's Backbone, which is a movie by Guillermo del Toro. I had such a hard time tracking this one down though, and I finally found it on Prime. And right when I was getting ready to watch it for my Friday movie night, it was unavailable, and it's still unavailable. So I'll have to come back to this one. So instead, I watched the adaptation of The Little Stranger by Sarah Waters. I think this book, I think this movie captured the characters well. The cast really embodied the characters from the book. And, when we were talking about this book, I had mentioned that it was from the point of view of Dr. Faraday. And so we always seemed to not really be directly involved in what was happening, which kind of took away from the experience of the book. However, in the movie, we get more of that front row seat to the events that are happening in the house, which I think helped my enjoyment, but this still isn't probably a movie that I would consider a favorite, and I probably wouldn't ever rewatch it. So let's get into my recommendations. For my book recommendations, I have The Sundown Motel by Simone St. James. This is a split past-present narrative, but the ghostly descriptions at the hotel were pretty creepy. Also, I think her other book, The Broken Girls, would probably work for this grouping as well. Anna Dressed in Blood by Kendra Blake is a young adult book about a ghost hunter who falls in love with a ghost. This was such an interesting take, and I loved reading from the perspective of the ghost. I think if you're looking for something, that's a ghost story, but not quite scary, this is probably a good one to pick up. This is a duology, and the second book is called The Girl of Nightmares. Next, I have Woman in Black by Susan Hill, which I did briefly mention earlier. This book is pure atmosphere. And it's the isolation and the loneliness of this character being in this house is really what adds to that unsettling factor. And lastly, I have The Haunting of Hill House. I don't think we can talk about ghosts and not include this. This was probably the first ghost story I ever read, and I was immediately hooked. If you like this book, there was a recent TV series with the same name called The Haunting of Hill House, which I thought was fantastic. I hated the ending, but we'll just skip over that. I would say it's loosely based on the books, but still pretty creepy. So I would definitely also recommend that. Movies I would recommend. First is Mama. And let me tell you, Mama is utterly terrifying. Next is Stir of Echoes, which actually came out in 1999 and is a movie I think is highly underrated. Next is The Awakening, which is set in the 20s and from the perspective of a ghost hunter who is a skeptic and exposes hoax hauntings, which I think is an interesting perspective for a ghost movie. And lastly is Ghost Ship. I think this movie gets a bad rap, but I've always enjoyed it. I love the paranormal atmosphere set on the water. And again, that stranded isolation feel just really adds to the atmosphere. About ghosts in general. I think something all of these books and movies have in common is the inner struggle of the characters experiencing these hauntings. So I would kind of break this up into 4 stages. So first you have, the experience, but you chalk it up to something not paranormal. Oh, and you opt to not tell anyone. Next, you continue to have paranormal experiences, which have now increased in intensity. And now you firmly believe that, yes, you're being visited by a ghost and spirit, but you still don't tell anyone because you don't want to seem crazy and end up getting committed. So the next stage, you're getting worn down. People start to notice, they're asking you what's wrong. You don't appear to be yourself. You're not sleeping because you're up in the night from all these experiences. So you finally decide to tell someone and they don't believe you. So you enter kind of the last stage in which you decide to solve the ghost problem yourself, which either ends bad or somewhat good. That's the other thing I wanted to mention about this ghost trope. Usually there's a reason behind the ghost affliction. It's something to solve. So whether you're experiencing a ghost haunting as a means of guilt because maybe you were directly involved in their death, or as a way of experiencing grief, and that person kind of becomes alive because you can't let it go, or you got involved because you occupy, whatever they're haunting. Either way, the ghost is there for a reason. And I think this was explained so well in the movie Mama. Let me play that clip.
A ghost is an emotion bent out of shape, condemned to repeat itself time and time again until it rights the wrong that was done.
So I think that's what a lot of these books and movies aim at, is righting the wrong and solving the problem. Ghosts and spirits can easily cross into other subgenres, especially with like haunted house and possession. And I think even witches and occult, if you think about, maybe what that type of spirit is. I also think that the ghost trope is probably one of the few on here that easily cross into non-horror. And I think of things like Casper, the Friendly Ghost, and Ghostbusters, which play more on, humor and that kind of playful side. And then there's like A Christmas Carol, which I watch every single Christmas. And I think these still all have that problem to solve. But of course, the nature and context of the ghost is really what makes it less terrifying. That's all I have for this video. I had a blast digging into ghost and horror this month, and I'll continue to pick up books and of course watch movies from this subgenre because it really is a favorite of mine. Go ahead and drop a comment below and let me know what your favorite ghost and spirit books and or movies are. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in my next one. Bye.